I'm starting off cutting each piece off the sprue, making sure to use the flat end of my hobby clippers against the model. For any bumps, I can use some files to gently sand it down. For mould lines, I can use a scalpel to scrape them away. This model is push fit, however I still want to glue it for security. There are some gaps down the side of the body, so I'm just using some Tamiya extra thin cement to melt the plastic and bond the pieces together. Last time I had a problem in that the arms were not seated correctly, so I wanted to make sure that they were in the right position this time. I'm using a design from Amberchrome on DeviantArt with a slight twist from myself. The arms are in the perfect position to be holding a steering wheel, so I'm aligning the arms prior and gluing them whilst holding the gun. And then, once dry, I'm cutting the gun away so the hands remain in the right position. I'm taking the arms back off so I can paint each piece separately. I use Paperclips for cork pins because they're easy to cut and bend, and you can get loads of them for cheap. But I open them up and cut them with pliers, and insert them into the corks. I use a gel-based superglue and place a tiny dollop onto the edge of the pin and then gently attach it to the underside of the piece I'm painting. For pieces that don't have a hole, I mark a score with my scalpel, and then drill a small divot for the pin to sit in. It's important not to go too deep if you intend to snap it off at the end, because otherwise the pin could get too snug and you won't be able to get it out. Then you can glue the pin down and stick it into a cork. Simply repeat this process for all pieces. To protect the bits that would be glued together at the end, I'm putting pieces of Bluetack on them so the glue won't melt and mangle the paint, and help them stick together better. I'm making the tyre and steering wheel out of Greenstuff. To start the tyre, I'm making a medium but thick tube. I intend to wrap this around a pen, but I don't want to get it stuck once dry, so I'm using some Vaseline on the pen prior to stop it sticking. I will leave this to dry overnight. Once dry, I'm filing it down to make all the sides flat. There are some bits which are still uneven, so I'm covering it in with sprue goo. Sprue goo is a mixture made from pieces of old sprue that have been melted down and mixed into plastic glue. It's great for gap filling. To measure out the steering wheel, I temporarily reattached the arms and drew a circle around it so I could make sure I get the right size. Once done, double check to make sure it's right. I tried a couple of different objects to see if I could get a size match, and eventually I found one of the corks I had lying around was perfect. Similar to what I did with the pen, I'm putting Vaseline on the cork so nothing accidentally gets stuck to it. I made a longer, thinner tube around the cork and glued the end together with sprue goo. For the supports of the steering wheel, I'm cutting up small strips of acetate, aligning them together and securing with plastic glue. For the inside of the tyre, I'm using the end of a paintbrush and flattening a ball of Greenstuff onto it. I'm using a dotting tool to create the 8 slots around the edge, opening them up with a scalpel. For the 5 centre holes, I'm using a pin. I'll leave this to dry overnight. I'm using superglue to attach the supports to the steering wheel. As for the centre of the steering wheel, I'm using some smaller balls of Greenstuff, flattening them against the middle and adjusting them around the edges with silicone tools. Once the inside of the tyre was dry, I slotted it in and went around the edges with sprue goo. Aligning the arms with the wheel, I measured where it would sit and cut the top part off so it would go in between the hands. I wanted to cover up the hole in the belt, so I drew a little lightning bolt on some acetate. I cut it out and stuck it down with superglue. To prime the model, I'm using Vallejo surface primer in grey, and I'm using this for all pieces. I'm going to be doing some underpainting for this. As with any mini painting, we want the shadows and highlights to contrast a bit. Because I want the colour to be red, I'm going to be using blue for the shadows and yellow for the highlights. When the red goes on top, it will mix with these two colours and create purple-like shadows and orange-like highlights. Orange and purple complement each other nicely and will thus create some stronger definition. For the blue, I'm using Caledor Sky and I'm spraying from the bottom up. McQueen is quite a bright red, so I wanted to make sure the blue was nice and bright too. For the yellow, I'm using Daemonic Yellow and spraying that from above. Once we are ready for the red, I'm starting off with a light coating of Mephiston Red. To further brighten the highlights, I'm using some Evil Sunz Scarlet from above. As for the shadows, I'm using some Nagaroth Night. Once that's done, I'm base coating the dark grey areas with German Grey by Vallejo. This includes the front of the chest, the creases of the armour, the belt, and the pouches as well. I plan to do an oil wash, so in order to protect the layer underneath, I'm using a very thin gloss varnish all over. To make an oil wash, mix a small dollop of oil paint into some Sansador or white spirit, and mix until you have a consistency similar to a wash or ink. Then grab a small brush, I like to use the ones from the Tamiya glue, and brush over where you want it to pool. You can wipe away any excess. I'm base coating the steering wheel black, and doing a black oil wash on all the grey areas. For the gold, I'm using Dwarven Gold by Scale 75. You can use a matte varnish prior if you're having trouble getting the paint to stick after you did the oil wash. For the dark metallic parts, I'm using Iron Warriors by Citadel. For the freehand on the shoulder pads, I started off with a base coat of bold titanium white and carefully painted the overall shape. Next, I'm using Daemonic Yellow at the top in nice thin coats, bringing it down halfway and then using Troll Slayer Orange in the centre. I'm making sure both paints are wet, and I'm using stippling motions to dab little blobs, trying to get them to blend together. This bit takes some patience. Keep working into it and then use some Mephiston Red at the bottom, trying to blend that into the Troll Slayer Orange, again using a combination of stippling and wet blending. I'm using the white again to clean things up. Don't worry if you need to go over some areas again. Once you're happy, using the smallest brush you have, very carefully go around the white to make a very thin border. You can also use a fineliner for this if it helps. Once that's done, clean up with Mephiston Red again, and repeat on the other side. I'm making a small circle on both knee pads with Mephiston Red, making sure the gold underneath makes a border. On one of the knee pads, I painted a lightning bolt with bold titanium white, using Mephiston Red to clean up if necessary, and then covered it in Daemonic Yellow. Similar to the other one, I'm making the shape of a flame in bold titanium white, using Mephiston Red to do any cleanup. I'm using Troll Slayer Orange to cover it with Daemonic Yellow to lighten up the centre. For the big lightning bolt, I'm base coating with bold titanium white and doing a very similar technique as to what I did with the shoulder pads, using Daemonic Yellow all over, dabbing Troll Slayer Orange and trying to blend it down to the middle of the yellow, and using Wild Rider Red to deepen the orange at the top, doing a light base coat on the tire with matte black, and gently starting to fill in the text with bold titanium white. There's not much I can really say on how to do this, apart from using fineliners if you prefer, being extremely patient, using a sable brush to make the brush a bit more stiff, and not being afraid to go back and forth a lot in order to make it as neat as you can. For the inside of the tire, I'm base coating it in Mephiston Red, carefully going around the border. For the base, I'm covering the feet in liquid mask just to protect them, and I'm base coating the entire base with matte black. Once that's done, I'm dry brushing all over with German Grey. Using small strips of masking tape, I'm marking off 2 small rectangles, making sure to leave a gap in the middle. And then I'm dry brushing some white on top. This is to make it look worn. And then I'm just going around the rim of the base with matte black, just to neaten it up. For the eyes, I'm placing Wild Rider Red all over the eye. On the inner corner, I'm using Daemonic Yellow and using techniques we used before, I'm stippling and dragging each colour into each other to try and blend them together. Troll Slayer Orange can also be used in the centre to try and get a smoother gradient. Once you are happy with the gradient, use some boiled titanium white to make a tiny dot on the outer corner as a highlight. I'm painting the supports on the steering wheel with Iron Warriors. I'm using the side of my brush all along the sharp edges of the model, with Evil Sunz Scarlet. This just adds a little bit of extra contrast to the model. On some of the corners and middle edges, I'm using a tiny bit of Wild Rider Red just to brighten it even more. To give a little highlight to the dark grey areas, I'm using Light Grey by Vallejo just along the edges. To start gluing the model together, I'm first taking the bits of Bluetack off and removing each piece from their pins. On some pieces where the superglue crystallized, you can remove it by drilling it away or scraping it away with a Scalpel. I'm using Tamiya extra thin and pushing the arms onto the body. I'm using superglue for the other areas as they don't have direct push fit points. To finish everything off, I'm doing a gloss varnish, and then a matte on top.